So today we have lots of people joining us, so I'm going to get them to wave as I just introduce them briefly, and then we'll get to the meat of things. We have Eric Liberta is joining us, originally from Montreal, we have found out, from the School of Occupational and Public Health. We also have Jeannie Goldstein joining us, who works with TRSM and the Chang School, also from Montreal. This is all coincidence. I don't think Michael's from Montreal, am I correct? There we go. Michael Dockstader joined us from the Schools of Creative Industries and Image Arts. And we also have presenters from the center as well joining us. We have Stephanie Getz from the Digital Media Projects team, is an instructional technologist, as well as Chloe Hazard from the center, who's also part of the e-learning team and is a marketing and communication assistant. Also, I am Sally Goldberg-Powell, so I should also mention who I am. I'm an instructional technologist with the e-learning team in the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. Moving on to in the chat, we also have more people. So I actually added a second slide for all the people we have here to help out. So we have Mariam Ahmed joining us, who's an instructional designer with the e-learning team. I don't know if she's here to wave, but I think she's here. David Arumbo is joining us as well. David, oh, there's Mariam. David's here as well, an instructional designer with our team, also waving now. We have Marilla Barbalescu, did I say it properly? I think I did. Excellent. Who's an instructional technologist, again, with the Digital Media Projects team and knows a lot about peerScholar. So will be helping us a lot during that section, especially. And Nada Savicevic is also here, who is an educational developer with teaching development and e-learning at the center. Okay, that was a mouthful, but let's get to it. So today we had our introductions, and then now we're going to go into some panelist presentations. We brought together our three panelists because they are people who have, in some way or another throughout this remote learning time, reached out to the people who make up the center for some support, to think through some problems, to find some solutions to things they wanted to do in their teaching that required a little bit of tech support and also thinking through how it would work in the classroom. And so we found these three great examples of people who, put in a little time ahead of the class in order to make the class run even more smoothly and offer new rich experiences for their students, using some tech-enabled tips and tricks that are all things that are either free or fully supported here at Ryerson. And then we'll have also Stephanie and Chloe showing you some other tips and tricks with things that we have available to you either through D2L Brightspace, a really great idea for a way that you can set some things up before the term begins, as well as Chloe's going to show you through some of our templates that we've built that you can use as a starting point for creating some Google Docs and other things through the Google Workspace. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to give it over to Eric, who's been using OBS in order to solve this issue that he was having in his class, or something that he was trying to grapple with, which was ways of showing calculations, working out problems, those kinds of things during a live session that had to be done on Zoom. So Eric, I'm going to hand it over to you and I'll stop my sharing now. And I think Chloe's going to spotlight you for us.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks for the introduction. So yeah, I reached out because during a transition initially in last March, I was struggling a lot to do a lot of math-based courses, but also in interactions. I teach very large courses, so 250, sometimes 350 people. And in that respect, in person works much better, of course. But once we went online and once I lost the ability to change to a projector as I'm writing and we were forced online, I was really struggling with this, essentially what used to be a 2 webcam method of doing this. It didn't work very well. And over the summer, I reached out asking for some help. I was pointed towards OBS. So that's Open Broadcaster software. It's completely free, which is amazing. And I absolutely went down the rabbit hole. There's no question. I like technology and I like figuring things out. So I did spend a lot of time sorting that out. I ended up watching a lot of YouTube videos from streamers. This is heavily used by streamers because, again, it's free and absolutely customizable. So right now, for instance, you're looking at an OBS scene, but I can modify that to turn off my video overlay, remove my Ryerson logo, all that kind of stuff. I can do whatever I want, essentially, as could you. So for the first half of this video, I'm just going to show you how I've set up my OBS studio just to briefly get through all the issues I was having. And then for maybe not the last half, but for the last ending bit, I'm going to walk you through just a very brief tutorial on how to set it up, because I've gone far overboard in terms of what it can do, but it doesn't have to be this complex. Admittedly, again, I love technology and I've integrated certain hardware into this now as well, and it doesn't need to be that complicated. So I teach an upper year course, and it's ENH 825, which doesn't matter, but it's a large class. It's a core course. Everyone takes it in my program. And so this is a landing page. First thing in the morning when students would log in, they would see this. I'm available, and they can see what the lecture is going to be about. I have a little scroller. Sometimes I have jokes or topics to be discussed. And you can also see what I've done here is I have the chat present. And this was a big thing for me. So I mentioned that I have a large class, and interaction in person is difficult. I mean, admittedly, but it's feasible. However, when I switched to online, that in-person interaction was lost. People didn't want to turn on their webcams. I'm sure you've experienced this, especially with large classes. People didn't want to speak. And admittedly, with 250 people, you can't have that. But the chat was very popular. So I took advantage of that. I managed to use OBS so that I could monitor everything I'm doing. I can monitor the chat. I don't have 250 voices in the background. And I have this kind of interaction, albeit via text, but it's great. You can see here, I've also added things like a very slow moving background, and all that's customizable. But moving forward, there's some advantages and disadvantages to using OBS. And it's personal in terms of what those advantages are, because I had to sacrifice some things to allow certain other aspects to work. Now, here's one scene. OBS works by scenes. So I just click a button and it changes to whatever scene I've set up. Again, this allows me to monitor my chat. And in Zoom, when you're doing a class recording, if you're, let's say, going to post the Zoom link later, it'll capture this in full screen. So it works out very well. But one of the great things, and again, I mentioned that one was class interaction, but two was the ability to write, because I do a lot of math. And so I have an iPad. Here's a pencil, but I have my iPad to the right, and I've actually integrated this into OBS. So it allows me to do that. Again, I know not everyone needs to go this far in, but I can write and do what I want. Now, one of the issues I ran into early on that I thought was a big problem, didn't end up being, was that if I go full screen, I can't see anything. So what's the point of having a chat open if I'm full screen in presenter mode? So in reality, this is what my Zoom looks like. I'm just zooming into this. This is my presentation. And what OBS allows you to do is just snip in here. So you can modify like that, modify the screens however you want. It works extremely well. Again, so I'm not in presenter mode. I'm not, hit F5 or whatever the version is on a Mac. I can highlight. The downside is, yeah, you get this little bar because technically you're editing your PowerPoint. Now, that was an issue for me because I wanted to monitor the chat. It didn't end up bothering me in the end because I don't really click on the screen too much. I actually end up writing a lot. So it was fine. I mentioned also that I have integrated hardware, and again, not needed at all. Right now, I've only been clicking. I've been purposely not using this, but I have something called a Stream Deck. This is used by streamers, for people that go on YouTube and video streaming for Twitch, like video games. It's unbelievable in terms of how easy it's made streaming. In the morning, I would come down, I'd hit one button, it would open up everything, log in, do everything I wanted to do. So with one button, everything was set up in that morning at 8 o'clock in the morning to go for 3 hours. It was unbelievable. Again, I've also integrated my iPad, and my iPad is simply a green screen. So I'm using it in green screen mode for that. But you can go far beyond that. I've mentioned, so this is one scene. When I have really complex problems, I go larger screen. Sometimes I need just my iPad, so I can write hello world, right? I can do whatever I want for math. I spend a lot of time in a textbook. We work from a textbook that we're publishing. And I found that most of the time I'm actually in this split screen mode that I've developed here. So I can actually have, this is a live PDF, and I can scroll through and so on, and I can write. And so I can do problems down here as we're doing, you know, I don't know, whatever, doesn't matter, but it allows me that interaction. So everything is completely interactive in that sense. After that, I won't go through many things. I have web pages. And again, these web pages are all interactive because they're live. I'm clicking them off my desktop. And then after that, here, I have a little break page. I'll show you the break page and then I'll move on in a moment here. So I have a break page. It automatically loads. Let me just mute it. Sorry. Of course, it's an advertisement. As luck would have it, it hits the advertisement. But I have an intermission web page, so I would take breaks, and normally this is a timer, right? So I have a 7-minute timer, and it goes forward, and it works out really well. The students really, really loved this setup in terms of the ease of interaction. The ease of interaction for me, I mean, I found it particularly amazing. I do programming, so when I'm dealing with my graduate students, it's very easy to share screens. And you can see here, I can also zoom into specific parts of programming and so on. And so for the last part of this, I just want to briefly show you how to set up OBS. Now, again, it doesn't need to be this complicated, but for this, I do need to have access now to share my screen. So again, I'll show you my scenes to give you an idea. Like this is my intro scene, and you can see these are all different scenes over here on the left. This is what OBS looks like. It works by scenes again. So if I want to change to a web page, I click on this, or I use the Stream Deck and I touch the button. If I want to go to a PowerPoint, big PowerPoint, my video, I just click around, do whatever I need to do. You can see, I'll go to this one. You can see I have a lot of layers, right? So you can turn those off and on. One of the things I love, one of the first things I did is I made an away from key button, so I can turn on when I'm away from the key. I have it actually set up on my Stream Deck, so I turn that on. I'm also muted, so I can completely walk away, go get coffee. But it's very simple to add in anything. So for instance, if we want to just add in that PowerPoint that I have, all I have to do is go to window capture. I'll just call it something new like PPT OBS. I'll hit OK. And I'm going to select my PowerPoint. And there it is. So here it is. You can modify this if you wanted to green screen it. But the way I'm working, the way I've set up, because I don't want to work full screen, is I would just zoom in like this. And I'll just shrink it for now. It takes no time to do that. And you can place it where you want. Everything is automatically saved. I'll add in my video, for instance, if I wanted to get a video of me. So I'll just call it me OBS. And I'm going to choose, I'm using here. So here I am. Okay. And I can place myself where I want. I can also modify the actual screen size. So I can just make it my head here and place it where I want. So that's the beauty of the OBS. I hope I didn't go over time here. I might have just for a little bit. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. It's not too difficult to get set up in the most basic sense, but it's unbelievably flexible. I've chosen dark colors just because that's what I prefer. But of course, we don't need to have dark colors. Oh, now I'm frozen here. God, perfect time to end my presentation here.
Thank you so much for that, Eric, because it's really nice to see how you actually put it into practice. A lot of us have been sort of starting to play around with it in our office. We have a lot of our career boost students now playing with it. And we're also hoping to have, hopefully we're playing around with trying to template a little bit of something that we could give to people as a starting off point, as well as some small training materials available or collecting some stuff. But as you say, because this is so popular in like streaming and gaming worlds, it can also be streamed to YouTube and used in other ways that you might not use as an instructor, but it is there. People use it with Twitch, for example. There are lots of YouTube tutorials out there to try it out and check it out. So there is a lot already out there, but we're going to try and find some ways to provide some tutorials or instructions that are related more specifically to teaching in the next little while. So hopefully stay tuned for that, and hopefully by the end of the summer. But in the meantime, if you're someone who'd like to be an earlier adopter, feel free to check it out. Another thing I just brought up here on the screen is there's another tool that is free for an hour a day, or free for the first month, and then there's a paid to use all the bells and whistles. You have to pay. You can use a fair amount of stuff free as well, called horrible name, but there you go. That is a simpler pared down version of what we're talking about with OBS, where you can do presentations and use yourself and use different windows and stuff and create something a little bit more composited, where you have more than one thing on the screen, without having to get into the nitty gritty of OBS, which has a little bit more of a learning curve. Not terrible, but a little bit. So if you're interested in checking that one out, I just wanted to offer that as well. And finally, at the bottom of the screen there, you see that there's a link that maybe someone can share in the chat to the using external tools or apps for remote teaching document, which gives you some good advice and things to think about in terms of privacy and security for your students as you look into external apps. And what I like about this example is it's something that you're doing on the instructor side that doesn't require students to sign into anything in order to benefit. So it doesn't have any privacy or security concerns for your students if you're using it as a presentation tool. Okay, so moving on now, we're going to go to Janie Goldstein, who has been using peerScholar for a while now. And actually, we presented together at the Learning and Teaching Conference about both of us using it, because she introduced me to how she was using it in her class, and then I used it in mine. So I'm already a convert, but I'll hand it over to Janie to explain why using something like peerScholar and setting it up ahead of time might be a good thing to do as well. So Janie, I'll give it to you, and I'll go to your first slide.
Perfect. Thank you. So, grading is tedious. We all know that, and students really want feedback. So I thought, what if I can just have them assess each other, essentially using peer assessment as a way of offloading my work to the students. Then I learned the extent to which students learn by giving feedback, and I discovered peerScholar. peerScholar is an officially supported tool by Ryerson, so there's a lot of support from the digital learning team, and a huge thank you in particular to Marella, who's here today, of the Digital Media Projects Group. She helped a lot. And also thanks to Sally, as she mentioned, who used peerScholar in her course, but she also collaborated with me on the presentation, created the graphics, and invited me here today. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that peerScholar was developed by U of T academics who wanted to achieve pedagogical goals of helping students to develop higher order critical thinking. As they developed it, they tested it in universities to ensure it satisfied these goals. So the driving force wasn't necessarily to create a moneymaker, but to create a tool to help higher order learning. So not only does peerScholar automate the peer assessment process, it provides instructors with full visibility into the student progress with a dashboard and a detailed list of everything the students are doing. It's also anonymous, which is key for students to feel comfortable when they're evaluating their peers. And this tool is so customizable that it can be used for virtually any assignment type and virtually any grading configuration. So when used most effectively, you're asking students to not only create their draft submission and then assess their peers, but then ultimately revise their initial draft. So there are three distinct phases: create, assess, and reflect. So if we go to the next page, how exactly does peerScholar help students learn? Well, reading other people's assignments and taking the time to assess them, whether it's qualitatively by giving comments or quantitatively by grading or scoring a rubric, and then reflecting on their own draft after they read other people's assignments, really helps students to better assess the quality of their own work. So some students, who think they did a stellar job may be surprised when they read other students' submissions and recalibrate. And other students who are really hard on themselves might be in for a very welcome surprise when they review other peers' work. Either way, reviewing peers' work helps students to better gauge their own performance, which is a critical thinking skill. This was one of the findings researched and statistically proven by the developers of peerScholar. So now not only are they gaining critical thinking skills, but they're also improving on their initial assignment, and they're doing it with each other without instructor intervention. So if we go to the next page, why this tool specifically? First, as mentioned, it was specifically designed for these goals to increase learning. It's also really easy as a student or instructor to use. Because it's a supported tool at Ryerson, Ryerson has created, and it was probably Marilla who did this, web pages with step-by-step instructions and screenshots to help students and instructors know how to use it. It also can access the class lists and the D2L gradebook. I mentioned it's customizable. So for instance, the type of feedback students can provide, whether it's qualitative, quantitative, a mixture, the number of students who provide feedback, and all the grading options. And for those of you who might be concerned about the quality of the numerical peer ratings, studies have found that if you get 5 student peer reviewers, they can provide a mean rating that is similar to the rating given by a TA or an instructor. So really, if all you wanted was to provide more feedback to students without you having to do it, that is still valid impetus for using peerScholar. But especially when attempting an assignment type that students haven't done before, they can submit their initial draft without being nervous of what their teacher or TA might think. They can read other students' work and become more familiar with the tasks that they have to do, similar to the, not sure what we need to do for this assignment. Can I see what you did so far? But instead of that being an academic integrity issue, we're providing them with a platform to actually do just that. So students develop a deeper understanding of the assignment instructions. And in my case, they use the actual rubric for their peers that I was using on future submissions. Using peerScholar also gives students the opportunity to assess the reviewer. And then you could decide to include the review of the reviewer as part of the grades using peerScholar. So the more helpful the feedback they provide, the higher the grade from peerScholar. And being able to provide meaningful, helpful feedback is, yes, another critical thinking skill. And I should mention, what I found really interesting was hearing from 2 students in Sally's class talk in depth about how using peerScholar increased their self-esteem. They felt that they're worthy of giving advice and helping others learn. It's not just the instructors. And they became part of this communal learning process in the classroom. And they also echoed the other positives that I mentioned before. So a big thank you to Sama Namat Allah and Sonia Ali for their insights on that. So if we go to the next page, it overviews how I used peerScholar in an entrepreneurship and strategy course in family business. I had students identify and analyze 2 best practices from a business case in a 1 to 2 page essay, which in week 1, they submitted to peerScholar. So that was create. The following week, they assessed their peers. And in addition to the rubric, I asked them to provide detailed comments about ways to improve the submission and what was done well. Each student reviewed 5 other submissions and received feedback from 5 students and did a self-assessment. So then in week 3, the reflect phase, they rated how useful the feedback they received was for them, and then revised their original submission, which they then uploaded into D2L. So half of the grades that I gave were based on whether they completed the required tasks. So that was the participation grade. And the other half was evaluative, which I'll show you in a minute. The peerScholar exercise was worth 5% in total, but only a marginal amount. So 0.5 of the final grade was based on the actual quality of the work rated by their peers. But after they had time to reflect on it and revise it, the assignment handed into me was worth 10%. So this type of assignment was new for them, was going to be repeated in the course. So this gave them an opportunity to learn and reflect, and provided a low stakes way to set them up for success. So what I'll do is I'll show you, if Sally, I guess I will now share my screen. Here we go. Let me know that this is fine. I think everyone can see it. So this is great. So this is what you will see as an instructor in terms of setting it up. You're building the activity, you're setting the dates for those 3 phases, and you're customizing the grading. So I'm going to start with building the activity. And what you see is that peerScholar has given you, they have default instructions that the students will see. What you can do is you can customize them for your particular course. So that's what I did here. And the other thing that I did is I added in an attachment, which was the guidelines and the rubric for this particular assignment. So they had all the detail for what they were supposed to do. It was also on D2L, but it was here as well. So that's the create phase. If we go to the assess phase, you can assign how many reviewers you want to how many peers are going to be looking at the assignment. And what I did, as I mentioned, is I had the actual rubric that they were going to be using, which was the rubric that I created. And you can see each component of the rubric is worth a certain amount, and students just tick off how they feel the student did. And because they were also doing a self-assessment, I used the same rubric, and I created that as well. So you could decide to do self-assessment or not. And again, for every section, there is instructions which you can modify. And then in the reflect phase, the last portion, I said, yes, I did want them to revise and resubmit. And I did want them to assess the feedback that they received. So I did want them to review the reviewer. And what I did is I created a pretty simplistic little rubric to ask them how helpful was the feedback provided, and was there a lot of detail given by the assessor. And so again, they just tick that off. Another thing that is pretty helpful as you go through this is there's this little eyeball over here. And what that allows you to do is you can see, this is the assess phase, what the students will see. So you can see that it's anonymous. You can see that the rubric is here and they have room for comments. The instructions are here. So you get to see what the students are seeing. Then if we move to the set dates portion, similar to what you would do in D2L, you're saying, when do they have to hand in their initial assignment? How long do they have to assess their peers? And when do they have to hand in the revised final assignment? You'll notice here, this says submit late, which you can tick off or not. You can either, I actually didn't put that they could submit late. What I did do is for each student, if there was a particular issue with a student, I can say that particular student could submit something late. You really don't want to have the whole class submitting late. It throws everything off kilter, in my view. So the last section is customized grading. And here, as I mentioned, 50% was evaluative. And so the actual rating of the quality of the initial submission, I said, let's look at that as a mean, and that was worth 10 points. You could change that. And then how helpful the feedback was for you, that was worth 40 points. That's really where I wanted them to spend their effort. I wanted them to spend a lot of time and energy giving really good feedback. And the other 50% of their grades based on participation is really just completion grades. So that was over the course of the create phase. Did they hand in what they were supposed to? Did they submit feedback? So I gave a little bit more points for submitting feedback. And the reflect phase also, did they assess the quality of their peer feedback? So that's what I wanted to go over, and I'll be happy to answer questions later.
Okay, so we have some further reading here that we offered during our presentation at the conference. So we left it into the slides here. So if you're really interested, you can take a look at the slides to read a bit more about it. The other great news, which is on the next page here, is that there is an event coming this Friday. You may have seen it if you get the TeachNet emails. There's a presentation being put on by Steve Jordans, who's one of the co-founders of peerScholar, through the Digital Media Projects office that is coming in to talk about specifically what our community can do with peerScholar. And so if you're interested in this, there's another session there, as well as instructions on the DMP's website. There was actually a previous session that went into depth about it as well and how to set it up. And there's also people you can contact. So if this is something that interests you, there's lots of support out there. And again, as you probably noticed, it's a lot about just going through that form and deciding what you want to evaluate and how you want to set it up. I'll say for my first round of it, I made it all about the feedback that they were getting and the reflection phase. So it was all based on the reflection they did rather than the marks they gave each other, because I was nervous about it working and putting it out into the world for the first time. And I'll tell you, all my fears were fine, like everything worked out. So, but that said, there's lots of flexibility in it to make it work for you. Okay, we're going to move on now to Michael. So I'll see if he's ready to turn on his camera again and join us here. I'm going to control your slides for the first bit, and we'll see what kind of timing we've got. And if so, maybe we'll get to see the website that you're talking about. So Michael's challenge was that he used to have like a in-person showcase, right, with your students. And then all of a sudden in this remote land, you had to find a digital way of doing it. And let's see what road he took to find a way to make that work, and what he used here using the WordPress blogs that we have available. And I should also mention that Stephanie, who's presenting in a little bit, is also the administrator of the WordPress blogs and will be in the chat during this presentation if anyone has questions.
In my courses, I usually do a participatory action research project that has the students collaborate in delivering a poster fair, and we've seen them and we know them all the time, but they're usually an idea of teamwork where studies have shown that students learn more outside the classroom, and that's the perfect setting for teamwork. So I'm not going to take up too much time convincing you about the importance of teamwork, but I wanted to show you exactly how I groomed a particular course last fall when we were pulled into the online learning era, that had me thinking about over the summer, how am I going to do my poster fair? And talking to Stephanie and talking to Sally, I was able to move around in this whole WordPress area with blog.ryerson and came up with an idea that was suited to the class. So From Page to Screen was a class that had 4 novels that we read, including The Odyssey by Homer, The Tempest by Shakespeare, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and The Crucible. And the idea is that we would read and then we would watch the film, so they would get an idea about how we went from page to screen. And that's based on my background in film, writing for TV, writing for full long form dramas. I'll just keep on going now and we can go to the next slide. So the idea of the virtual expo, and this is actually pretty much the PowerPoint that I use to present this to the class. I do it for a lot of classes too, by the way, but I'm just showing you the one from NPF 188, and that's where I expose them to the idea of what they would be doing in the blog, which is basically an exhibition, an online expo, and that there would be galleries and there would be doors to go through. But each of those teams that were volunteered to go into the thematic areas or the thematic silos would then create the gallery through that door. And they were listed as categories in Ryerson in the blogs, so that you could put categories with labels: xenophobia, monstrosity, some of the labels that were used in this particular class. Part of it is, oh yeah, and here's the thematic areas that were used: xenophobia, monstrosity, the struggle against death, womanism and witchery, patriarchy, the paterfamilias, progress, the good life. Some of the textual areas that we had been talking about throughout the class, but they were each asked, and these were groups of 12 to 15 people, to put on a show in your silo. And one of the areas to expose them to this media was to actually provide them with some online videos that I was able to find and had used in the past. And they were cheats as well that helped them to be able to get an idea about what they could possibly do inside the silo or their gallery. And we had one of the places that you might be interested in going is to this edmodo.com. Edmodo is sort of a WordPress site, but it's one thing that I use as my own private research site. Is it teaches how to put a learning environment together as well. Go to the next one. And I had 3 ideas to open them up a little bit so that they weren't just doing PowerPoints. They actually did motion picture. We had people do a performance art, spoken word, which won America's Got Talent last year, was also some way that they could express what they wanted to say about their thematic area. And Lumiere is from Nova Scotia, and it was a gallery that was done online with young Native students. And they put together a gallery so that you could walk into the gallery, walk around and look at everything in sort of a virtual space. And of course, The Immersive Van Gogh exhibit last summer in Toronto was another piece that showed them exactly the expanse that we could do here. But with Blog Ryerson, it's fairly close. It's almost like a website. Actually, it looks a lot like a website. And so it's a website with doors to go through so that you can examine a particular thematic area. And that was the idea with showing all these videos, is to open them up to the potential of what they might be able to do in that time and space of the expo. I also showed them from other universities where I taught about some of the productions done by the students, and that they were asked to be divergent thinkers now about what they wanted to do, and not just produce a PowerPoint or a little video. But we had text, we had motion picture, we had video, we had spoken word, we had static display graphic elements done by students that would be found in any exhibit gallery. And that they also had then some wording that they used and coordinated with each other to produce a gallery. Let's go to the next one. So this billboard, which was used for the course too, by the way, on D2L, is an important feature of what I did with the URLs from the blog, but as well as different materials that were available, is that on D2L in the announcement area, I would put, first of all, the link for the Zoom for the class. It was there all the time, but also the blog link was there as well, so they could go in and work on their stuff. And it was available for them right on D2L. And the billboard for the class then was used as the, go to the next slide, the billboard for the blog site. And so it was recognizable to them. And you can see it's almost exactly like what you would find with a website. And my thinking with that is that since what's happening now with online learning and homeschooling is that there's a whole new industry that needs product. And that the idea of exposing people who are in FCAD or the creative school and image arts and creative industry students, as well as others in the university as well, is that here's the new industry now. Maybe you don't want to stand in a classroom and teach, but maybe you want to make stuff that teaches. And parents are looking for all kinds of extra teaching materials now. And that's the new industry that's been exposed over the last year and a half, now that we found out that air is cheaper than bricks, and that we were able to produce then an idea for the students then of participating in the production of a product and an output that could quite well make them some money if they were good at it and produce things that would be purchased by consumers and plunk down their $19.99 PayPal or whatever they wanted to use to make the transaction. But as you can see from the site then, continuation or continuity that I used in this case, which was the billboard, as well as setting it up so that it looks like a website. And also the menu bar here with home, about the Fabulous Expo themes, about the class, and about the expo, that lists the stuff that was in the PowerPoint, where it was their mission to do these kinds of thematic areas and express themselves and so on. And that was able to set up so that all they'd had to do is go into the category, click the button, and monstrosity and modernity would pop up, and there they would be able to go to work inside. There's other things too, mechanical things that are required by the instructor to do, which is to actually load all the students into the site. And there are dialogues down the left-hand column that help you quite a bit to be able to find out how to go up and load students in and put them in the right silos. Let's go to the next one. And here's just a couple of random examples from the exhibitors and what they did. So you have on the left-hand side, the graphics that was used in a almost like a magazine article that was posted. And I pulled the graphic out because I wanted to show you that there were actually some creativity that was expressed through the use of the digital media by the students that had them be able to produce a graphic that went along with the text that talked about the different characters that they had decided to write about in dealing with the idea of womanism and witchery that was expressed through the materials that we discussed. And on the right-hand side, we have what were basically the design components for static display exhibitry that would be the pull-out kind that you'd find in the plaza or in a gallery setting, and the students were able to produce these types of materials using skills that they're using in other parts of their programs as well, to be able to communicate what they had decided that they wanted to talk about with the thematic expression that we were using in the course. Again, another example of two areas where students had used their own creativity and created actually images of them on their own. We even had art. People did paintings, and it was original artwork that was again done and reproduced and placed inside. I don't have them right here, but they're in the blog. Go again. So the idea with the blog site is that we have the thematic areas that were expressed in the silos that were a part of the courses, but it was the idea that I told the students this as well, is that here's a chance for you to practice and participate in a new industry now, because everything has changed now. That's just the way it is. And that, can I go to my screen and so I can talk to folks face to face? There I am. And so you can buy this book and read it. I did after I talked to Sally and Stephanie, and I was so amazed by what they were talking about. I thought I better go memorize this book. No, I didn't. Stephanie and Sally have memorized this book. I can quiz them. What's on page 110? No, I won't. But what it does is gives you a background to show you that how blog Ryerson is platformed, and it's done on the internet. But you can also, if you want to, create your own platform and content management system to be able to do your own blog site. But that's a whole other story. But it gave me an immersion into what the thinking is that helped me a lot with Sally and Stephanie to do my work, and also put together my own cheat book. I mean, it's an important tool, so that when you go through and you find things, it's best to write it down, because sometimes it's not clear in blog, for example, how to make your site public, and you have to know what you're looking for. And I didn't know. So I was looking all over the place. How do I make my site public? And then I found it was linked way over into a third column that I finally found it and was able to open it up. But I wrote it down now, and it helps me to be able to navigate through my own system that I created. I think that's about all I have to say about it, other than to say that the students peer evaluate each other. I'm going to take a page out of Janie's stuff and see if I can use that, but they peer evaluate each other. And the TA and myself, we get the fourth column, the last 5 points, because they're so kind to each other. I don't know how many 15 out of 15s I had, and so they're very kind to each other, but to get them into an area where they completed it. And I wish we could change that so that they either complete or incomplete, because they all completed and did a really nice job, and it was fun. And also the public was opening it up to the public, had them be able to invite people to come, deans, chairs of departments, and so on, to come and walk around in there, open all the day of the class so that they could wander around from 8 o'clock in the morning till midnight and look at their colleagues and peers' exhibits, and also to score each other. And so it was all part of an educational process where we would be able to then all collaboratively inquire into the delivery of the thematic mission that they were charged with completing.
Excellent. So I wanted to throw out there that right now it is actually still public, the site. Are you comfortable sharing the link? And if we share it, Stephanie has it.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, so if anyone would like to see the site in its entirety, we'll share the link with you there. Yeah, and I'll ask Chloe, you can go ahead and share your screen. So she's going to take over for me. And yeah, just to let you know a little bit about what's available here from WordPress. Again, we have the expert in the room being Stephanie. But just so you know, there's some different ways you can use WordPress, right? It can be for personal blogs. It can be for collaborative writing. You can showcase work like Michael did for his class. And you have options, like he was saying, for this to be public or private. You have options for every student in your class to have their own little space or to work collaboratively. So it, again, is another flexible tool that's available here and supported by Ryerson and has support for you if you want to get started, but would like to have someone to bounce ideas off of or get support from. So I'm going to hand it over to Chloe now. If you want to switch the screen one more time there. We've been working at the center with the e-learning team, and we have some Career Boost students as well that helped us with this to put together some templates that you can use to get a kickstart using some of the Google tools in your teaching. So I'm going to hand it over to Chloe, who's going to show you an example of one of the things you could use in your class, as well as where to find these templates.
Thanks, Sally. Yeah, perfect. So these are a couple examples here of the resources we've created. We have libraries of icon sets, presentations, which include Google Slides and PowerPoints, Google Docs, and Google Forms. And they're all kind of customized for teaching, and you're able to download them and save them to your own personal Google Drives so you can customize them as well. And I'll have somebody put the link in the chat. The one I'm going to be going over today, though, is the Q&A Google form. We're a little biased because we made it, but we think it's a great resource. It's a great way to have students ask questions in one spot and for you to answer them all in one location. So just some things to note before I do the demo. You can customize the template and share the form via email or a link on D2L Brightspace. And if you're familiar with Google Forms, you might already know this, but you can provide links and instructions in the little description. So you can discourage students from asking the question again, or if it's already been addressed somewhere else, like your course outline. You can also set the form to notify you when there's a new submission or not if you don't want all those emails. And we have made note of instructions on how to share the responses with students and instructions on basically everything I'm going to go over. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed or you want to come back and review it later, you definitely can. So we can also share a link to the template that I'm going to use and the library in general. So I'm just going to do a little demo, 1 second. So right here on the Tech for Teaching website under remote teaching, you can access all of our libraries just right here. So once you've located one you want to use, it's going to look something like this. You'll open it up. So this is the Q&A form I was discussing earlier. So we've included all the instructions here, like I said. So the first thing you're going to want to do is click the link. And you are able to make a copy. So this means that it's going to be saved to your personal Google Drive and we no longer have access, so you can do with it whatever you'd like. So you can customize it, change the color, add new text. We've included a little spot for a warning, and this is what it looks like. The first thing you're going to want to do, though, is submit a sample question as if you were a student. And you can do this before you even set it up and share with anybody. Next, so we're going to ask, how many words should it be? Sorry, we have to watch me type here. Okay, so submit. And now on the back end, you're going to see that we now have a response up here. So you'll see this here. We'll see how many words should it be. And you're going to select create spreadsheet. You can name it whatever you'd like. And this is also going to be saved to your Google Drive. Second. Okay, awesome. So it's just loading. And as students fill out the form, all their questions are going to be populated in column B right here. So they'll just show up here automatically because it's a live document. And we're going to put all our answers here in column C. So you can answer the question and you could continue to answer them as they come in. So the next step is pretty important because you do want to share this document with students. So you're going to go up here, you select share, and we just want to share it with Ryerson You can make it more exclusive and just share it with your Google Classroom, something like that, a select amount of students. So we have at Ryerson, we want to be view only because we don't want students answering questions. We want to be the only people to do that. So we'll select copy. And now in our Google form, obviously you can put whatever you'd like here, but the most important thing to put is a link to the spreadsheet. So now you'd obviously want to add a little note to please check this out before you submit another question. So if I was a student, I would be looking at the Q&A form like this, and I can now see questions that my peers have asked and how they've been answered. So this definitely does require a little bit of setup, but it saves you from receiving a bunch of emails and having to answer the same question a bunch of times. So we think it's pretty helpful if you have a larger class, especially. I know some people have tried it out as well, and it's been super helpful. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Stephanie and Sally.
Sounds good. So I think Stephanie's going to take over the screen sharing. That way she's going to be able to demo as well in a moment. But I just wanted to add with what Chloe was saying. I've been using this one in my own class of 100 and almost 50 students. And what I love about it too is at the end, when I have that spreadsheet, I can go back and refer to that spreadsheet later. I have it saved to my drive. It's always there, and I can see what the questions were. And make adjustments to my assignment if there was something that was unclear for next time, right? So that's another great thing about having it in that spreadsheet format rather than as individual questions or something in the discussion board or in your email that you've got to go find later. It creates one place where all those questions go. The other thing I found I start doing too is if someone asks the same question again, I just say, please see line 5, and they'll see just up at the top that the answer is already there. So it saved me so much time. So hopefully it's a helpful tool. And there's lots more forms and options. And we have Google Docs with activities you can do in your class for collaborative things, stuff like that. A whole bunch of different ideas. It can be found in those templates, and feel free to use them however they work. Use them as a starting off point and change them up completely. However you want to use them, it's up to you. So I'm going to hand it over now to Stephanie, who's going to show us a really great tip about D2L Brightspace, about a way that it might look like it's really just about getting emails, but in a way, it's really about setting up notifications for yourself and for your students, which I think is fabulous when you think of it that way. And I'll hand it over to Stephanie.
Thank you. I'm assuming you can see my screen just fine. And if I switch over to D2L, you can see that as well. Yes, awesome. Okay, good. I'm all set. So as Sally mentioned, this is kind of about emails, which doesn't sound especially sexy, but it's an interesting way to use emails. And one of the problems with this tool is that Brightspace, or D2L, the company, has called the tool intelligent agents, which doesn't really tell you what it does. So I think a lot of people aren't using it. And if anybody has used intelligent agents, feel free to just type, I've used it, in the chat, just to get a sense of if anybody's actually been using it. I know I've introduced it to a few people over the years, but it's still one of those kind of mystical, magical things. And so basically, I mean, I'll start off with just sort of overview. It's a way to send smart emails based on criteria that you set up. So you determine who gets the emails based on what thing they have or haven't done or haven't achieved. And you can use this to help identify some gaps, to acknowledge student achievement, and also encourage engagement. And I mean, that doesn't really tell you much. And there is a lot you can go into, and we've only got 10 minutes. So I want to make sure to start with a pretty clear example of a way that you can use it. And so when we talk about criteria, that seems like, you know, some kind of cloud thinking, but let's start with something concrete. I want to receive an email when a student is enrolled into my course show. We've had this experience, you know, probably every year, where you start the class and a couple weeks in, there's a new student who's never spoken up. You don't realize that they're new unless you go into RAMs and check every day. And what if you're setting up groups in Brightspace for the students and you have to know to manually add any new student because of the way that things are set up, or maybe you want to provide some resources. At very least, you want to know that you've got a new person in your class. So as the instructor, you want to be notified when there's a new student added to your class, and then you can do whatever you need to. But then let's take that the next step and also loop in the student as well. So this tool can not only notify you, the instructor, but it can also be used to send the student a welcome email, which can tell them, hey, welcome to the class. This is how we're going to be using Brightspace. When you first get here, here are some resources. Here's where you can find your course outline. And the first thing I'd like you to do in the course is this. And give them a nice introduction to the class and a little bit of hand-holding, which is always a good thing. And you'll notice before I leave this slide, there is a tutorial on setting up the first part of this intelligent agent, just to give you a little taste of the steps required to set up a basic intelligent agent, test it out, and enable it. It's only the instructor part of it. We're going to be discussing the full thing. So we've got a couple of links on this slide. But I'm going to switch over to Brightspace to go over this concrete example before we get into the other uses of the tool. So in my course, I'm going to go to my course admin because this tool is only visible to the people who are on the teaching team, instructors. I think TAs should be able to see it, but in general, it's best when the instructors set it up. And you'll find intelligent agents listed under communication, because really at the end of the day, this is a communication feature. You set up criteria, it sends an email. You'll see I have a number of different intelligent agents set up in my list here. And at a glance, you can see I've set up some titles that make sense to me, some descriptions that make sense to me. The students don't see these, so that's fine. We won't get into too many details, but make note that you can set it to run on a schedule. So every day, every week, between a certain set of dates. So you can see the last time it was run is listed in the column. How many users matched my criteria is listed in another column. So you can see who matched. And then when is it going to run next? The ones that don't have a date, I haven't set them up to automatically run. So I can run them manually, or I can set them up on a schedule. So the student welcome message I've set up on a schedule. So automatically what happens every day at around 4 p.m., because that's when it happens to run, it checks to see who's enrolled in the course. Are any of them students? And I'm not going to go through every little detail of this agent. There are a few details to make note of, obviously, but there are two main things that I want to show you because these are the most important things to note about what an intelligent agent does. Number one is the criteria. Who do we want to target with this criteria in what situation? So first of all, our concrete example here is a student enrolled in my course show. So first of all, we can see that we can limit based on what role the person has. So we don't want this to go out to all the TAs, to the instructors. We only want it to go to students. So scroll through the long list of all the roles that we have in Brightspace, check off student, and that means that the criteria will only match against people who are students. The next thing that you'll see in the criteria section are two things based on activity: login activity, course activity. Login activity lets you pick based on the number of days a user has or hasn't accessed Brightspace in general. The second is the number of days they have or haven't interacted with your course shell specifically. The second one is probably more of interest to you as an instructor, but that's not what we need. We don't need to know when the last time they accessed the shell was. We only want to know that they are enrolled in the shell. So that's where release conditions come in. And for anyone that's used Brightspace for a few years, you probably have heard the term release condition. You've possibly even used it to release announcements, to release content, to release quizzes and assignments, even grades. The same principles are used here, where you can click create and attach, and you get a long list of areas of Brightspace, including tools like assignments and quizzes, checklists. You can also look at the list of members of groups and decide, are we going to base this on something that the student has completed in one of these tools, like an assignment or a checklist? Are we going to base it on a grade that they've achieved? Or are we just going to base it on membership? And this particular example is that they're enrolled in this org unit, which is Brightspace's weird word for our course shell. So they're enrolled in this course as a student. So the criteria every day is going to go through and say, who is enrolled in this shell as a student? And that's all we need for this. And the one last thing to point out as we get into this action section is you can determine whether it acts on the agent. So in other words, it sends out the email only the first time that a person matches these criteria, or every time. And you want to make sure in this case, because it's going to check every day and say, who is enrolled as a student in this class? You only want to send out the email the first time somebody matches, because basically we're saying this is a new person in the class. And that's the default, so that's easy. You could also set it to send out an email every single time, but that could be a little bit overwhelming and we don't want to spam our students with email. And so as I scroll down, criteria is the first important thing to set up and understand about these intelligent agent emails you're sending out. The second thing is the email itself. So not only are you setting up a useful email subject and email body to send out some information to the student or to yourself, but there are some key variables that you can put in, and variables are just little pieces of code that you can put in to make this dynamic. So first look at the to field. So normally you would put in somebody's email address, but when you're matching a different person every day, what address do you use? In this case, there's a special code that it says initiating user, which is the person that matches the criteria that we just set up. And really, in this example that I'm giving, that's our students. The new student that just joined my class, this will be who the email is sent to. And so the body of the email is really geared towards them. This message is for them. I'm also CCing myself as the instructor of the course so that I also get that notification when I have a new student in the class. So the body of the email, I don't even really need the body, that's for the student, but I'm getting the notification that they're new so that I can act on, whatever additional things I want. The other thing to note, if you look in my subject line and in the body, there are some other codes that you see in here. These are other dynamic pieces of information that you can plug in, including initiating user first name, which is the person, the student's first name. And that's one way to personalize it a little bit so that they know it's not a mass email, it's meant just for them. And you can also use org unit name, which is actually whatever name you have in your course shell. And that way, if you create an intelligent agent that's somewhat generic enough, you can actually copy it from one course to another course to another course, and it will fill in the name of that course. And so you can actually reuse them in some way. So they're really, really handy for copying. And of course, you can copy and edit them if you need to. But they're very reusable if you want to. And so in the end, this is really just a basic email that tells the student, this is how we use Brightspace. Here are some resources if you don't know how to get to Brightspace. And when you get there, here's where to find our course outline. And that's pretty much it. And I don't want to go through all of the details of filling out this form. We have some instructions online that can help with that. But I wanted to cover the two main points, which are the criteria that you set and the features of the email. And basically, I've kind of just set up our example where I, as the instructor, am getting a notice that somebody new has been added to my class as a student, but then the student is also receiving an email with some useful information that can help them get access to the course and engage with the materials that I need them to in the first couple of weeks of class. And so with that sort of in the back of your minds, here are a couple of other examples that you can use intelligent agents for with different kinds of criteria. So here's a category would be identifying gaps, things that the students have not yet done or where they may need some additional resources to help give them the student experience that they need. So for example, you can have the criteria set up to let you and the student know if they haven't accessed your course shell in 2 weeks. So you can give the student some encouragement, provide them some materials for what you'd like them to be doing. Just giving them that little bit of a nudge and a reminder that they should be interacting with the course. You can set up criteria to say, hey, you've missed a deadline for the quiz. Or you could even set it up 2 days before the deadline of the quiz to say, this deadline's coming up, don't forget to submit. If you have a class discussion that the students are expected to contribute to and they haven't participated, give them a little bit of a nudge. And then part of it, if they're not engaging with the class, what are some of the things that you could include in this email to make it sort of more understood by the student why they should be engaging? So for example, with a class discussion, if it's part of the whole learning process, which of course, as an instructor, you've set up these things carefully to tie in the discussion with the learning with next week's class, make sure that the student understands that all of these pieces are connected. And I think you can put some of those things into the email to help explain how all of these things go together and why it's important for them to contribute to the discussion. Also, you can set it up based on grade. So say the student achieved less than 60% on the midterm. You can provide some additional resources that might help explain some of the salient points in a slightly different way. You can provide some opportunities for makeup assignments. Again, engaging with the student directly and also giving them the opportunity to engage back with you if that's something that they need. So these are all examples of, gaps or things that maybe haven't been done in the class. On the other side of things, we can also use intelligent agents to acknowledge achievement and enhance engagement further. So these aren't things that are missing, but the student is on track. They're completing things, they're getting the grades, but you don't want to slow that train down. You want to make sure that they get to the next step, that they engage with more materials, give them even more things that they can access if they're excited about it. So, even just as a kudos to say, we see you achieved over 80% on your midterm, you're doing great. We also have an awards tool in Brightspace. That's a great way to do that as well, if anybody's interested in that. You can also start to stage the learning materials in the course. So we've got some instructors that release module 2 once the student has completed module 1. Take that the next step. When they've completed that final assignment in module 1, send out an intelligent agent email to say, this is great, you finished module 1. Now let's get started on module 2. Here's what we're expected to learn, and here's the first step. And that's something that you can send to their email instead of just relying on them coming to the course and reading the material. And all of these things allow you to sort of have a relationship with the students through email, which again is not exciting and maybe not the millennial way of communicating, but it's an additional way outside of the Brightspace shell to engage with the student and have them engage with the course and with you. And so I think that's enough of me talking initially. I don't know how much time.
That's awesome. I'm just thinking about, all these times that you start going through your D2L shell and going, oh, did everyone hand it in? Or do I need to send them an email reminder? Oh, what should I do? Thinking about being able to set that up, say a few weeks before classes start, and having some of those things automated so that during the course of a semester, you don't have to think about it as much. Maybe you just go in and run it. If you don't want to automate it to that degree, because you want to have some control, which makes some sense. I definitely see myself finding ways of setting this up and really thinking about it, especially having, in large classes when you have a lot of people to.
And I think this is one of the good things to start looking at now, because I think once you're in the thick of the start of term, you look at this and think, it seems like icing. It's not, it maybe isn't the meat of your course, but it could help to, direct the flow of the course a little bit. So having a little bit of time to look at it now, and it's a little bit fiddly, but once you get the hang of using it, I think it can be a really useful tool to help, it's almost like dominoes, right? Like you set up all these different things to happen, and then the course just kind of has a little bit more of a flow to it, instead of having to always tell the students, no, you have to go here. No, you have to go here.
Yeah, and some of the feedback we've gotten from students is the idea that everybody sets up their shell a little bit differently. And we give you some flexibility there, a lot of flexibility with the tool, and D2L has so much flexibility in it. But being able to send them that first email that says, here's how you'll use this course shell, would probably give a lot of peace of mind to a lot of students, and be able to refer back to that email and know it's there. Would be helpful. I know I also usually have a module in there that I call Start Here, which has all that stuff too, just to make sure. It's nice to have just one place to go to find everything, for sure. So yeah, lots of different. Oh, one more thing I mentioned in the chat, just to remind people, is that you can request your D2L Brightspace shell even before the students are populated in it. So be aware that you don't have to wait until the last minute to get your shell and then rush to do all these things. You can likely get it a few weeks before class starts, have time to set up intelligent agents or whatever else you want to do in your course shell, and then add the students later. And it's really easy now to add your students later, which is nice. I know it didn't used to be, and now it's great.